I'm Phil Hellmuth Jr., and in this lesson we'll give you some basic questions you should ask yourself before acting on your hand. Like most other checklists, these questions and answers will become second nature the more you play, but even experienced players can do well to take a few seconds to run through this list before they bet. While there is no one way to play any given hand, Lord knows, there are a number of items that every player should review before they make a bet or a call. By keeping a mental track of these items as you play, you'll be able to better size your bets or your raises to accomplish your specific goal in the hand you're playing. First, and most importantly, you should always know how many chips you have in your stack. The size of your stack relative to the blinds will determine what kind of actions you should take. With a very short stack, your pre-flop options are generally limited to folding or moving all in. A bigger stack, say something with 30 big blinds or more, gives you additional options, including raising or re-raising an opponent before the flop. The second factor to consider before you bet is your position relative to the button, which moves clockwise around the table after each hand. As the button moves closer to you, you need to act earlier in the hand, which means your position becomes worse. The blinds, who are in the two seats immediately left of the button, are the two worst positions since they have to commit chips to the pot before any cards are dealt. The player immediately left of the big blind is under the gun and in the next worst spot at the table. Since the player with the button is last to act, he is in the most favorable spot in the hand. The players on his immediate right, known as the cutoff and the hijack, are the next most favorable spots since they get to act after the majority of the players at the table. Acting last is big. Because being in early position puts you to disadvantage to the players who are left to act behind you before the flop, you generally don't want to commit any chips to the pot without a fairly strong hand, like a high pair, say tens or better, or something like ace-king or ace-queen. In later positions, say in the cutoff or on the button, you can play almost any two cards for a raise if the action is folded around to you. After the flop, being in later position still provides a big advantage as you get to witness how your opponents act before you act. If everyone in front of you checks on a flop of something, say like ace-10-7, you may be able to steal the pot with a bet, even if you haven't connected with the board, even if you're sitting on 2 threes. Basically, if you are check raised by someone, you can easily reevaluate the action and decide if you want to continue or fold. The third item to consider before betting is the size of the blinds and the amount of money already in the pot. Because you are trying to tell a story when you bet, you need to make sure that your bet or your story makes sense. Bet too much or too little, and your opponents won't buy your story. You won't be able to sell them what you're trying to sell them. For pre-flop bets, a general rule of thumb is to bet between 3 times the big blind and 4 times the big blind. This means if you open the pots with blinds of, say, $25 and $50, you want to lead out for between $150 to $200. If another player has called $50 in front of you, you should adjust your raise by adding $50 and making it between $200 to $250 to go. If antes are being used, you should account for the extra money before you raise. Say you're at a 9-handed table with blinds of 100 and 200 and a $25 per player ante. This means there's now $525 in dead money. That's a $100 small blind, $200 big blind, that's $300, and $225 in antes, that's $525. If you would raise to $600 without antes, which is 3 times, consider adding between $150 to $225 onto your raise in order to compensate for the extra money lying in the middle of the pot. This means a standard pre-flop raise here should now be between $750 and $825. Bet sizing remains equally important after the flop. Let's say that 3 players have put $150 into the pot before the flop, giving us a total pot of $450. You're holding the king, queen of spades on a board of ace of spades, king of diamonds, 9 of diamonds. Bet too little here, say $100, into the $450 pot, and you're giving your opponents better than 5-to-1 odds to call. They only have to call 100 to win 550. That's 5.5 to 1. Bet too much and you're not giving your opponents any kind of odds to call you with a hand that is weaker than yours. In general, a good rule of thumb for post-flop betting is to bet a percentage of the pot. Say 1/2 to 2/3 of the pot, 50% to 66% of the pot, and to bet this amount consistently on every street. The next item to consider is what action has taken place in front of you, because this will help you determine the strength of your hand. Something like ace-jack may be very powerful if you're on the button and everyone in front of you is folded. On the other hand, it looks pretty weak if a player in early position is raised and a player in middle position is re-raised. In that case, you'd be an easy fold with ace-jack. By paying attention to the action in front of you, you can determine the relative strength of your hand against your opponents and plan your course of action accordingly. Because nothing at a poker table happens in a vacuum, whatever. You also need to consider the tendencies of your opponents before the flop. Are they tight? Are they loose? Are they aggressive? Are they passive? Say you're holding pocket queens, and a player in early position makes a pre-flop raise for the first time in an hour. What kind of hand do you think he may be holding? Would you really want to re-raise him in this position? Now, let's say you have pocket queens, and a player who has raised 5 out of the last 10 hands makes a pre-flop bet. Would you really want to re-raise him? Yes, I would. While you're studying your opponent's tendencies, also be sure to consider how they may play back at you. Will they be likely to fold to a re-raise, or will they be likely to move all in and defend their bet? How big is their stack? Has their bet size committed them to the pot, or can they afford to fold their hand if you apply enough pressure? By studying your opponents and their tendencies in each hand, and this I do every day, including the ones you're not playing, you'll be a lot better able to plot a line of action against them and devise a strategy that's going to help you win. Finally, remember that you want every one of your bets to have a purpose. Are you trying to get your opponent to commit their entire stack when you know you have them crushed? That's pretty sweet. Or are you trying to get them to lay down what may be a better hand than yours? Bluff, bluff, bluff. Take the time to run through this checklist and you'll find yourself making smarter decisions, which in the end is what being a great poker player or a successful poker player is all about.